Here we are on torso, part 2. I've actually crept back one page to 337 because I need to have two diagrams for this. This is the first diagram right here, in which I'm looking at the base of the skull, and I'm looking at how, at this point right here, this is the off to the side, and you can feel this on yourself. This is right behind your ear. Males have a bigger one than females on average. It's called the mastoid process. Okay, females usually have a slightly more petite version of the mastoid process. Males have a slightly more elaborate and larger development for the mastoid process. We learned a muscle right over here called the Sternocleidomastoid, which pulls on the mastoid. This is usually a little bit more developed in males than females. In fact, all the muscles and skeletal tissues in general above the waistline on average in the male is a little bit more substantial than the skeletal tissues of the female, whereas below the waistline the skeletal tissues are more or less equal to one another, male and female. The pelvic girdle is still nevertheless a little bit lighter in terms of matrix of the bone for the female, but nevertheless, in general speaking, females can be as strong from the waist down as our males. So here we have the mastoid process. We have this diagonal Splenius Capitis, and so it's a somewhat superficial muscle, and there is a even more superficial muscle that comes this way called trapezius, but right now we're dealing with intrinsic muscles, and we'll get to trapezius eventually. Okay, so again, I'm not asking you for innervation here. I'm asking you only to observe that this is the case. Splenius Capitis coming from the, let's take a look here at Splenius Capitis. It says that we're coming from the ligamentum nuchae and the spinous processes, and we're going to the mastoid. Okay, what is ligamentum nuchae? This is an important detail for you. If you take a look at a horse's neck attaching to the head, you'll notice that a mane is coming down, part of the, how shall I say, the fur, the hair coming from the horse. And horses have really substantial ligamentum nuchae. Any running animal, any animal that runs, and that would not include a pig. Pigs are very poor runners, but horses are great runners. And humans, actually, it turns out, are pretty good runners. And any runner that maintains their vision, clear vision while running, has a ligamentum nuchae. So that's an important little, how shall I say, anatomical and evolutionary detail that you should pay close attention to, because before erectors, before the modern human, Homo erectus, would be the modern human of 1 million or 2 million years ago. And then, of course, Homo sapien came after that. Basically, we left the forest and we went to the grassland and we became runners. And this is one of our gifts for having changed teams, as it were. Okay, so there's our Splenius Capitis. Then deep to the Splenius Capitis, and that's where I'm coming back to this particular picture right here. I've actually drawn in what could be Splenius Capitis right there, and they over here we have Longissimus Capitis, but I'm asking you to know Splenius Capitis. And then deep to that is going to be a muscle that is not diagonal, but it's actually in the sagittal plane, and that's referred to then as semispinalis Capitis. Okay, so I need you to know that there are two layers of muscle underneath the trapezius. Okay, we come next to this one, a more superficial muscle, Splenius Capitis, and then we come to a sagittal muscle right here that is semispinalis Capitis. And that completes the story for those intrinsic muscles. Okay, we're going to take a look at the front of the body, the anterior view, ventral, and we're going to be taking a look here at what's between the ribs here and here. We have external Now it's a little bit difficult in this particular picture to see that the fascicles here are running from upper lateral to lower medial. And I refer to this as hands in pockets. If you were to take your fingers and imagine that there's a pocket down here and you're coming from the sides, you could slip your fingers into that vest pocket. Okay, so we're going from upper lateral to lower medial in this sort of diagonal direction, and that's the external intercostals. Over here we have the internal, and it's going sort of 90 degrees, just the other way, from upper medial to inferior lateral. Okay, so they're kind of opposite each other. External intercostals are for inspiration. They lift the ribs in sort of a bucket handle kind of way, right? So they actually increase the dimensions of the thorax from side to side by lifting the ribs up. Here we're actually pressing the ribs down, almost like Venetian blinds, and so we're doing an exhalation. Okay? So internal intercostals, exhalation. External intercostals, inhalation. Okay, inhalation is also referred to as inspiration. Exhalation is referred to as expiration. Okay, so I need you to understand that. So that's part of just normal breathing. Another part of normal breathing, of course, is the diaphragm. So here we have the diaphragm, just the way you like it. Okay, and notice that we have a central tendon here, and that the diaphragm actually circles the entire, circumference of the lower thoracic, upper abdominal, and it divides the thoracic from the abdominal. So that's part of the program here, is that we're going to make that division. We're going to allow certain things to go through. The aorta has to make its way through. So here's an opening for the aorta. It's called the foramen, or actually it's the aortal hiatus. Historically, it's always been referred to as a hiatus in the English language or Latin language, as the case may be. Here we have an opening to allow for food, the esophagus, the esophageal hiatus, to come down and fill the stomach with food. Then we have the return of the venous flow of the blood, and this is referred to as the venous flow goes through the inferior vena cava, so we have the inferior vena caval hiatus. Okay, so those are nice tight fits, and we actually can move this thing up and down, and it's sufficiently tight that it creates differences in pressure in the lungs. When this comes down, then we're going to be having less pressure. We're going to have actually a partial vacuum in the lungs compared to 1 atmosphere. And all you have to do more or less is open your nose and your mouth, and passively air will come from the outer world into your body and into the lungs. Okay? Who operates the diaphragm is the cervical plexus, and there is a collection coming from the spinal nerves C3, C4, and C5. So there's a saying that we have in medical school where we say C3, 4, and 5 keep the diaphragm alive. And the specific nerve that does that job for us is called the phrenic nerve. Okay. With regard to innervation up here, this is just whatever the spinal nerve is. So if we're between, for instance, the first and the second rib, that's T1. Okay, so these have intercostal branches of the spinal nerves. Here, this is the diaphragm, we have the phrenic nerve. So the phrenic nerve, C3, 4, and 5, keep the diaphragm alive. This is good news for people with spinal cord injuries, because they usually have spinal cord injuries below C5, which means they can still breathe. And their breathing is unaffected, hopefully, by the spinal cord injury. Okay, so that's that program right there.